Congress shut the government down a total of 8 times for 14 days. So Democrat-controlled Congress actually shut the government down under Reagan for longer than it has been shut down now. And again, under Mr. Clinton, of course, the House also shut the government down. And in each of those instances, there was something different than what's now, and that is that there were negotiations going on. President Reagan was negotiating with the House and the Senate. President Clinton was negotiating with the House and Senate. But this president says absolutely no negotiations. Now, this president will negotiate with Syria. He'll negotiate with Iran. He'll even have secret negotiations with Russia and seek secret deals. But he will not negotiate with the legislature. Now, what won't he negotiate over? He won't negotiate over the debt limit. He wants to take the country from $17 trillion to $19 trillion in debt. No negotiations. He won't negotiate on his sequestration. In my community, there were 12,000 people that were furloughed. The president will not negotiate on his sequester. The president will not negotiate on funding the government. We have sent countless bills over to the Senate that would reopen the national parks, that would fund the veterans, that would allow the Washington, D.C. to spend its own funds. And Harry Reid heartlessly has said in response to these bills that would provide needed services, why would we do that? But we know that the president is playing politics because this House and the Senate passed Pay Our Military Act. It was signed by the President of the United States. I have 2 letters I'd like entered into the record to Secretary Hagel and to the President questioning why he would have furloughed 400,000 DoD workers when he had signed the Pay Our Military Act. 8,700 workers in my community were furloughed. Now, how do we know that they were playing politics by letting the Department of Defense employees go, even though that the president had full authority to fund them? Because he's going to be calling them back. He's calling them back without any other passage of any other law or any other law that he signs. So clearly the president is admitting that he's been playing politics with these furloughs, and it needs to stop. It also needs to stop so that our federal workers do not have to worry about their pay. They do not have to worry about the impacts on their personal lives. They have child care expenses, house payments to make, kids that are in college, and while the president refuses to negotiate while he's playing politics, they shouldn't worry about whether or not they can make ends meet. I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 3223 that would restore the pay to federal workers and ensure that they have the security that they need. I yield back the balance of our time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Rule 371, the previous question is ordered. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to provide for the compensation of furloughed federal employees.
The question now is on passage of the bill. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay.
It's for a recorded vote.
Does the gentleman ask for the yeas and nays?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote of the question of passage of the bill will be followed by a 5-minute vote on the motion to suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 58. 407, the nays are 0. The bill is passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson, to suspend the rules and agree to House Concurrent Resolution 58, on which the ayes and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 58, concurrent resolution expressing the sense of Congress regarding the need for the continued availability of religious services to members of the armed forces and their families during a lapse in appropriations.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to the concurrent resolution? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. Have all members cast their vote? Any member wishing to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 400, the nays are 1, 2/3 being in the... Yeah, that's where I was going. 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the concurrent resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed with an amendment, H.R. 1848, cited as the Small Airplane Revitalization Act of 2013, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of privileges of the House. May I be recognized?
The gentleman may read the resolution.
The form of the resolution is as follows. Whereas the BBC News on October 1st, 2013 in England published the following. For most of the world, a government shutdown is very bad news, the result of revolution, invasion, or disaster. Even in the middle of its ongoing civil war, the Syrian government has continued to pay its bills and its workers' wages. That leaders of one of the most powerful nations on earth willingly provoked a crisis that suspends public services and decreases economic growth is astonishing to many. Whereas the state-run Xinhua news service on October 2, 2013 in China published the following, quote, with no political unity to redress its policy mistake, a dysfunctional Washington is now overspending the confidence of its leadership, close quote. Whereas the News of Mexico on September 25, 2013 in Mexico published the following, quote, they squabble over the inconsequential accomplishments of a 10-week funding extension. It isn't serious, but it certainly isn't funny, close quote. Whereas the Australian on October 1st, 2013 in Australia published the following, quote, the irresponsible way in which Congress played the politics of partisan petulance and obstruction does them little credit. Neither does it say much for the budgetary processes in the world's largest economy, close quote. Whereas the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung on October 2nd, 2013 in Germany published the following, quote, the main actors in this dispute, which brings together many factors, both ideological and political, took a huge risk and unhindered proceeded to validate everyone who ever accused the political establishment in Washington of being rotten to the core. The public is left wondering how things could have been allowed to get to this point and why there is so much poison in the system, close quote. Whereas the Süddeutsche Zeitung on October 2, 2013 in Germany published the following, quote, what has already been apparent in America for a few years is now the self-destruction of one of the world's oldest democracies. And the great tragedy here is that this work of destruction isn't being wrought by enemies of democracy, greedy lobbyists, or sinister major party donors. America's democracy is being broken by the very people who are supposed to carry and preserve it, the politicians. At the moment, Washington is fighting over the budget, and no one knows if the country will still be solvent in 3 weeks. What is clear, though, is that America is already politically bankrupt. Close quote. Whereas the Washington Post on September 30th, 2013 quoted Justice Malala, a political commentator in South Africa, as saying the following, quote, they tell us you guys are not being fiscally responsible, and now we see that they're running their country a little like a banana republic. There's a lot of sniggering going on, close quote. Whereas the headline of the New York Daily News, the fourth most widely circulated daily newspaper in the United States on October 1st, 2013, read, quote, House of Turds, and the byline stated, DC cesspools shut down government and, quote, they get paid while nation suffers, close quote. Whereas these reports call into question the dignity of the House of Representatives, and whereas the resulting reduction in the public's perception of the House's dignity has culminated in a 7% congressional approval rating in the most recent Economist YouGov poll, now therefore be it resolved that it is the sense of the House, one, without seeking to effect a change in the rules or standing orders of the House or their interpretation, and two, without prescribing a special order of business for the House, that a government shutdown is a mark upon the dignity of the House, and that the House would be willing to pass a clean continuing appropriation resolution to end it.
Under Rule 9, a resolution offered from the floor by a member other than the majority leader or the minority leader as a question of privileges of the House has immediate precedence only at a time designated by the chair within 2 legislative days after the resolution is properly noticed. Pending that designation, the form of the resolution noticed by the gentleman from Florida will appear in the record at this point. The chair will not at this point, determine whether the resolution constitutes a question of privilege. That determination will be made at the time designated for consideration of the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Prepared to entertain 1-minute requests. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, when Congress was unable to reach agreement on a funding bill, the House acted immediately on the Pay Our Military Act. The bill passed the House on September 29th, the Senate on September 30th, and was signed into law by the President that same day. The Pay Our Military Act ensures that military personnel and active military reservists will be paid and receive their allowances during this government shutdown. Over the past week, the House has put forward legislation to fund critical areas of government. We passed our Pay Our Guard and Reserve Act and the Honoring Our Promise to Our America's Veterans Act. Yesterday, we considered and passed the Nutrition Assistance for Low-Income Women and Children Act, and today we passed another bill to fund the government. These measures should have received the support of every member in this chamber. They are the bills that should have passed the Senate and made their way to the President's desk. The President and the Senate should back these bills just as they did the Pay Our Military Act. Let's end this stalemate and move forward with the people's business. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker. And
Without
ask unanimous
objection, the
consent.
gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, members, I want to wish congratulations to our Republican majority and thank you for bringing a bill to the floor that would guarantee pay for the furloughed federal employees. The essentials employees that are already working will be paid from existing law. So now we're going to we pass to the Senate where those furlough employees will come back to work, will be able to be paid. My question to the majority, Republicans, is now that we're going to pay these furlough employees, let's bring them back to work. Why would we not bring them back to work if we're paying for them? This is the first time I know I've heard of people being paid not to work, but I never heard the Republican majority before that. I voted it. It passed unanimously out of the House. But let's bring those folks back to work, and let's reopen this government, put those dedicated federal employees who don't have to stand down there and stop our veterans to go to the World War II Memorial, those folks who are working on all the things that make our country great, let's bring them back to work. We can do that. We're going to pay them. Let's let them come back and do their job. And I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona stand? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my precious privilege this morning to express a loving tribute to one Marguerite Freeman. Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Freeman was my 3rd and 4th grade teacher. And if I could be with her right now as she is surrounded with family and friends and well-wishers on her 103rd birthday, I would just look into her eyes, Mr. Speaker, and say, thank you, precious lady, for all that you've done for me in this life. Without your loving encouragement to me as a child, I may never have had the privilege to stand here in this place and speak on the floor of the United States Congress. And I was only one of hundreds of children whose hearts and minds you so deeply touched with your noble message of love and human dignity to the generations to come. So, beloved Mrs. Freeman, only eternity will discover your magnificent contribution to humanity. Happiest birthday to you, gentle lady, and may God keep you forever. That's what I would say, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
To ask consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Federal workers already under sustained attack from the Republican shutdown caucus certainly deserve to have no further abuse. But approval of this bill is surely one of the more bizarre moments in a truly bizarre Republican-controlled House. These great conservative stewards of the taxpayers' dollars refuse to let our federal workers work. And now today they approve legislation to pay them for not working. Getting nothing for your tax dollar. That's the new Republican Tea Party concept of fiscal responsibility. And of course the federal workers, even though they have paid leave now, are justifiably unhappy because of the uncertainty of not knowing from day to day whether they will be called to work and not knowing whether that paid leave will arrive in time to meet their bills at the end of the month. Paying federal workers not to work, a new level truly of absurdity in this politically manufactured government shutdown. I yield back.
And time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just as Mr. Doggett has said, the absurdity, I'm not sure if this is Joseph Heller or if it's Fellini. The Tea Party Republicans came here because they were concerned about the debt. The debt, Mr. Speaker, was caused by Reagan and Bush. Look at the records. Reagan and Bush caused the debt.
Sure.
Now they've shut down their government like an arsonist sets a fire, and they're coming around acting like they're firefighters trying to rescue the children who they didn't realize were in the building who couldn't get help from the NIH for their cancer treatment, and the veterans they're going to rescue who couldn't go to the memorials, and the federal workers who aren't getting paid. It is like a Fellini movie. There's apparently a wall between the Tea Party Republicans and the mainstream Republicans who would like to move this country forward. Mr. Speaker, tear down that wall.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition? Texas, excuse me.
Yeah, I'll take Texas. I ask unanimous consent to rise, address the House for 1 minute.
Without
Revise and extend
objection,
my
the gentleman
remarks.
is recognized for 1 minute.
And Mr. Speaker, what is going on in the House of Representatives right now actually is about the debt. And you know, you can look back 17 years when Speaker Gingrich was Speaker of this House. What was gained by the Republican majority during that time? If you just look at it from purely political lens, actually the Republican majority was reelected for the first time in 68 years after that last government slowdown, the last time being 1928. This House passed welfare reform, and passed welfare reform, and passed welfare reform until President Clinton signed the bill. The largest capital gains tax reduction in the history of this country was passed after the last government slowdown, and the first overall reduction in taxes in 17 years occurred after the last government slowdown. 4 consecutive balanced budgets came out of that activity. Probably the only balanced budgets in my lifetime occurred after Speaker Gingrich had the courage to do what he did 17 years ago. And Mr. Speaker, perhaps most telling, in the State of the Union address that followed the government slowdown last time, President Clinton stood in this House and announced the era of big government is over. those are words we can aspire to. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome to the alternative universe in the House of Representatives. We just voted, as we knew we would, to pay the furloughed workers when the shutdown ends, as we knew we would. What started as a right-wing tantrum to defund Obamacare, which failed, as it inevitably would, and then it became a demand to pull the rug out for another delay, we're now arguing about something. Negotiations? What? Since we've decided to pay everybody anyway, let's vote on the continuing resolution so we can at least get work in exchange for paying our employees and stop losing tens of millions of dollars every hour. The Republicans now want to negotiate. I think that's terrific. We have been waiting for 6 months for the House Republicans to appoint their conference committee so we can reconcile differences on the budget. Let's vote on the continuing resolution. Let's appoint conference committees and get back to work.
Gentleman's time expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing an interesting dialogue today in the 1 minutes. Last week, House Republicans brought to the floor a bill before the shutdown to pay our military. Both sides totally supported that. The Senate accepted it, and the President signed the bill. So that's law. Early this week, after the shutdown occurred, House Republicans brought to a floor to fund the Veterans Administration, to fund National Cancer Institute research, to fund and open our national parks. My friends on the other side of the aisle, most of them, not all, but most of them voted no against that and called it a gimmick. Today we brought a bill to the floor, the House Republicans, once the shutdown is over, to pay furloughed workers. Again, on that one today, both sides embraced it and said it's a good thing. And now my friends on the Democratic side are getting up and arguing against themselves. We want to open the government. We want to
Gentleman's
end this,
time
but
is
we want to
expired.
keep as much of the government functioning while we do it.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Through the looking glass, curiouser and curiouser, said Alice. I'm confused. It started out as we're going to shut down the government until we repeal Obamacare. Then it was, okay, we'll shut down the government until we delay Obamacare or the individual mandate or repeal the device tax or something. Now I just heard a gentleman from Texas say, we're shutting down the government because we're concerned about the deficit. What is it? Which is it? Now, come on. You're concerned about the deficit. Then we have a process. It's called the annual budget process and appropriations. It's a law. We should follow the law, which means temporarily continue the government. We don't shut down the government to, deal with our differences in how much money we want to spend each year for what agencies. This is getting absurd. We're now going to pay federal employees to not work. Let's just declare them all essential, make them come back to work, and then we'll pay them later. Maybe in the Republican world that makes sense. No, let's just end the shutdown, bring them all back to work, give them their regular pay now, let them have their leave, and move forward with negotiations over the budget.
Are there any further 1 minute requests? Start here. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just one minor point. We say Oregon. And since the Ducks are going to win the national championship this year, we want to make sure everybody knows how to say it properly. Thank you. I rise today to discuss something that happened earlier in the week. Now, the Republicans are playing whack-a-mole. Every time something pops up in the national press that is really embarrassing about this shutdown, they hit it with a phony resolution that they're going to fix the problem that they know is going nowhere in the Senate and not going to the president. So earlier this week, after the extraordinary embarrassment of the veterans at the World War II Memorial, I was just down there for an honor flight this morning. They still don't have bathrooms, by the way. Now, they decided, well, that, and then they were hearing from a lot of small business people outside of Yosemite and other parks saying, you know, open the parks. Okay, so they took one little tiny slice of the Department of Interior budget and they funded it. That which is most iconic, that which is most visible in the press. But guess what? They forgot everything else that goes on within the Department of Interior. Now, I'll start locally and we'll build back to the national issue here. The William L. Finley National Wildlife Refuge in the Willamette Valley opened the very popular firearms hunting season for black-tailed deer late last month in September. But this week, they're having to turn away hunters because of the House government shutdown. The Bandon Marsh National Wildlife Refuge, also in my district. Great spot for waterfowl hunting. Right now, the only thing it's open to are swarms of mosquitoes. My colleague from California will talk in some detail about the Klamath Refuge, closed. The beginning of hunting season, closed. The Fish and Wildlife Service in Oregon recently proposed that 3 other Oregon refuges, Basket Slough, Nestucca Bay, and Siletz Bay, be open to hunting. Guess what? They can't continue the process to open those areas to hunting because of the government shutdown. According to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, nearly 300,000 hunters spend more than $135 million a year by shutting down the federal government and restricting hunting access on public lands. House Republicans have turned their backs on sportsmen and small businesses, not just in Oregon, but across the country. In addition to hunting, the refuges provide anglers for fishing, hikers, kayakers, birdwatchers, and other outdoor enthusiasts, all who spend money in the local communities around these refuges. They're not coming. They're not spending the money in the local businesses, all because of the phony shutdown of the government. Well, it's a real shutdown, but the stupid shutdown of the government by our Republican majority. National wildlife refuges generate $1.7 billion in sales for nearby communities, and many of them are totally dependent, or much dependent upon that for their survival. And every day, small businesses across the country that relate to hunting and fishing and other outdoor recreational activities, $4.5 million a day in lost sales to their small businesses. You know, this has got to end. There are other very serious issues which a number of my other colleagues will talk about here this morning as relates to commercial fishing, commercial crabbing, and a number of other critical activities that are fulfilled by the federal government under the Department of Interior, which were not restored or phonily restored by the Republicans. With that, I'd be happy to yield to my colleague from California, Mike Thompson, such time as he may consume.
Well, I thank the gentleman, my friend, for yielding and also for bringing this issue to the attention of the American people. And, by the way, for the great work you do as our ranking member on the Natural Resources Committee. I think Mr. DeFazio made a great explanation, a very instructive explanation about this whack-a-mole game that we're playing. The Vets Memorial is closed, so we do a bill to open that up, a bill that we know isn't going anywhere. There's an issue comes about because of the lack of cancer treatment that some of our constituents need and must have, so we do a quick bill, a whack-a-mole, a quick Band-Aid. The Capitol Police demonstrate that they put their life on the line every day, and it became very, very apparent this week when we had the very unfortunate situation over in the Senate. So what do? We come out now and we say we're going to pass a bill to pay for federal employees after this fabricated government close down is done. Those are all very, very serious issues, and there are a lot of other serious issues in front of us. And that may pale in, what may pale in comparison is the issue of the wildlife refuges. And people may say, well, you know, that it's just a sport, it's recreation, but to some that's very, very important. And just a week ago, ironically, our nation celebrated the National Hunting and Fishing Day. But today, sportsmen and women who are supposed to be out enjoying the opening day of duck season in many parts of my home state of California, but they're not because of this reckless, manufactured government shutdown that has shut down hunting opportunities throughout the entire National Wildlife Refuge system. This shutdown is having a devastating impact on local economies that depend upon hunters and anglers throughout our entire country. There are 240 congressional districts that are home to national wildlife refuges. That's all the way across the country. This is an issue today and will be until we do away with this shutdown and open the government back up. Every state has at least one refuge which allows hunting. So today, hunters are supposed to be lined up at places like the Tule Lake National Wildlife Refuge, the Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge, and the Kern National Wildlife Refuge in my state of California. But because of this shutdown, all have been canceled. Some duck hunters will be able to pursue their opening day on non-refuge land, but without hunting pressure on the refuges, their hunting is going to be shut down, closed, or at least truncated to some extent. In addition, and this is a very important issue that I think everyone needs to pay attention to, most of the access for California's disabled waterfowl hunters is found on our state's National Wildlife Refuge system. With the refuge closed, that means that disabled hunters, including many, many wounded warriors, will simply have no option for waterfowling. And in 2 weeks, all of the waterfowl hunting areas in California will be open. So if we don't end this shutdown, millions of sportsmen and women will continue to be shut out from their refuges. And it's not just the hunters and the anglers that are affected by the closure of these wildlife refuges. Hunting in California is big business. In 2012 alone, hunters and anglers generated more than $1 billion in retail sales. And they created and they sustained at least 20,000 jobs in California alone. I've heard from folks who own businesses around these refuges, restaurants, gas stations, a family-owned hotel and motel that rely on the business generated by hunters. Some local lodges and motels have seen every one of their reservations for this weekend and the following week to be canceled. They were supposed to be fully booked. Next week is supposed to be their busiest week of the year. And now, because of this fabricated shutdown, they'll have empty beds. At Curb's Outlet, a sporting goods store in Tule Lake, Don Curb, the owner, told me that he was expecting to have a big season for sales this year. Instead, he anticipates losing about $6,000 every day that the refuges are closed, and he may have to take out a loan just to keep his small business open. Hunting guides in the Klamath Basin region are losing $800 to $1,000 every day that the refuge remains closed. And just over the Oregon border, the Wild Goose Motel in Merrill could have booked up all of their hotel rooms several times over because the demand is so high for this week and this weekend and next week. But according to Fran Lynn, their manager, out of their 13 rooms and 2 cabins, they have 1 room that will be occupied. These businesses that rely on the next few weeks of hunting season to keep them in business for the rest of the year are in a hurt, and they can't make up for the loss. This first week is their big week each year, and it will be lost forever. California hunters want and need access to our national refuges. It's time for the House majority to put the interest of our nation ahead of the interest of the Tea Party and end this needless and reckless government shutdown, which is having an impact on millions of sportsmen and women around our country, along with federal employees who are being furloughed, folks waiting on veterans benefits, the folks waiting for cancer research and treatment, and the closure of our national parks. This manufactured shutdown is costing us $12 million an hour. Please bring back the clean CR to the floor for a vote so we can open our government. As all it takes is one vote, put it on the floor, and Democrats and Republicans will provide a strong bipartisan vote to pass it, to open our government, to get people back to work. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. My colleague Mike Thompson is the two-time chairman of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, and he was recently inducted into the California Waterfowlers Hall of Fame. So he obviously speaks with great authority on these issues and the impact of this unnecessary shutdown on hunters and related businesses in Northern California and Southern Oregon. With that, I would yield time, such time as you may consume, to my colleague from Washington State, Ms. Del Bene.
Thank you. Many of my colleagues today have been highlighting the impacts of the shutdown on sportsmen and women who are unable to access our national wildlife refuges for other public lands. As they've made clear today, this is a serious problem that's costing our country millions of dollars and is denying access to those who would otherwise be enjoying the great outdoors. In my home state of Washington, there are 11 wildlife refuges where the public can hunt or fish. All of those refuges are closed because of the shutdown. But it's not only recreational users that are being impacted. Commercial fishermen in my state will be seriously hurt in the coming weeks if this shutdown does not end. Right now, fishermen from Washington State are in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, getting ready for the Alaska king crab season that's supposed to start in less than a couple weeks. These are the same fishermen and boats that you see on the reality show The Deadliest Catch. But because of the shutdown, they may not get to start fishing this season. That's because the staff at the National Marine Fisheries Service have largely been furloughed. As a result, no one is available to issue the rules and individual quotas for boats and processors that will permit our commercial fishers to work. The Bering Sea crab fishery is worth hundreds of millions of dollars to fishermen from Alaska and Washington, and now, because of inaction in Congress, the fishing fleet, the captains, their crews, the processors stand to lose millions. So instead of a fiscal cliff, right now we're facing a fishing cliff in the Bering Sea unless Congress acts before the season is scheduled to start on October 15th. If the season doesn't start on time, the cost to industry is significant. A delay could mean they'll miss out exporting to the all-important Asian holiday market when demand is at its highest and most lucrative. Missing the Asian market when in its peak demand means prices significantly decrease by as much as 20 to 30%, which means millions of dollars in lost value. This would be a crippling loss to these businesses. And in addition to the potential loss of millions of dollars caused by market disruptions, the effects of the shutdown will be felt in other ways. Fishing boats typically incur costs of roughly $1,000 per day while sitting tied to the docks. Things like moorage fees, fuel, and food to feed the crew all cost the boat owners money. A delayed crab season means processors will have empty facilities and an idle labor force that still has to be housed and fed. So processors will be contending with costs for housing, fuel, electricity, food for laborers, and more while not bringing any desperately needed revenue. Every day this shutdown continues, we're hurting the fishing industry. Without knowing when the season will start, these businesses have no certainty or visibility to plan. If we delay the start of the crabbing season by even a few days, we risk costing the entire industry millions of dollars in lost market value. This is unacceptable. Our fishermen deserve better than this. Their families deserve better than this. the processors, suppliers, and other businesses that rely on a vibrant Alaskan king crab season all deserve better than this. It's clear that this shutdown is hurting people, businesses, and our economy. It's time to end it and get to work on passing a long-term budget that will grow our economy, reduce our deficit, and responsibly create jobs. I urge all of my colleagues to work together and do the job the American people sent us here to do. We must end the brinksmanship and do the responsible thing and reopen the government. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back. I want to thank her for her statements and her concern for the Washington crab fleet and others who've been impacted by this manufactured crisis. I find it particularly bizarre now that this all started with a radical Tea Party minority on the Republican side, and I wonder what their supporters and constituents who seem to hate all things government are thinking about the fact that we are now paying federal employees to stay home and not provide critical services like opening of the crabbing season in the state of Alaska. I would also note that the West Coast groundfish trawl surveys have been suspended. The ships, the 5 ships who were out there doing the survey were called back to port. All of the NOAA employees were sent home, but they will be paid later sometime. But they aren't doing the critical work we need for those commercial fisheries. With that, I would yield to my colleague from the state of California, Mr. Garamendi, such time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. DeFazio, thank you so very much, and thank you for pointing out the foolishness, the nonsense, and even the hypocrisy of what's going on here. My colleague, Mike Thompson, with whom I share a good portion of Northern California, very eloquently pointed out a real problem. Now, when the duck hunters can't hunt, we got a problem. Opening day, how many days to opening day? 0. Supposed to open today. Mr. Thompson pointed out that the refuges are closed up in the northern part of the state of California. How about elk hunters? Elk hunters out there? Opening day? Today. The refuges are closed, and a good portion of the federal forests also are unavailable. Let's see, pronghorn hunting in Northern California and Southern Oregon, supposed to start today, not on the refuges, they're closed. Oh, if you're a fisherman and you want to fish in the refuges, don't go today, they're closed. And of course, the hunters. I think I'll just leave this one up here, because these are folks that really get agitated. And they have every reason to be agitated. This is nonsense. I really want to just take a few moments to explain to the American public what is actually happening here. We came up on this shutdown, presumably because we couldn't agree to a budget. House of Representatives passed a budget in March. The Senate passed one in late March, early April. The Senate asked for a conference committee. They appointed conferees, and Speaker Boehner, to this moment, until 2 days ago, refused to appoint conferees. It was only after the government shut down that he relented and appointed conferees after the blow-up. And so you want to go to conference? Why didn't you go to conference in April, May, June, July, August, even early September? Why, Mr. Speaker, didn't you appoint conferees when we had the time to negotiate? Why did you wait until after hunters couldn't go to the refuges? I don't understand. Oh, but you have a solution. The Speaker has a solution. We will open up individual parts of the government based upon what Mr. DeFazio calls the whack-a-mole theory of government. When something really embarrassing happens, we'll find a solution, says the Speaker. Wow, how brilliant. And so what did we do? Oh, we'll open some of the national monuments, not all of them. We're not going to open the Fish and Wildlife Refuges so that the hunters can hunt, but we'll open the World War II Memorial. And maybe we'll open up some of the Smithsonian facilities here in Washington. Oh, but there's a problem. That's got to go through the Senate. And that's got to have the presidential signature. And that's not going to happen. So what's going on here? What's happening? The American public said, what are you guys doing? Well, we're not doing our job. Mr. Speaker, you're not letting us do our job. We actually have a solution. It's called a continuing resolution, a CR. And that's not a medical procedure. A continuing resolution is actually a process been used over 110 times since the first day of President Clinton's, yeah, I said that, President Clinton back in 1993. 110 times we've used continuing resolutions to get past these unnegotiable periods. But this time, they added a little deal to it. There'll be a continuing resolution when you repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, when you delay it, when you repeal part of it, when you change it. That hadn't been done in the past, but here we are. So where are we now with the whack-a-mole theory? You know what these are? Does the American public know what these are? These are 11 of the appropriation bills. Each one very lengthy, more than 500 to 1,000 different items in each one of the appropriation bills, funding individual parts of government, one item at a time. It's a big government. It's a multi-trillion-dollar government. And it does a lot of good things like refuges, so that people can go hunting, so that people can fish, so that there are national parks, camping grounds. The national forests all across this nation, camping grounds, shut down. Nobody's camping there this weekend. These are the appropriation bills. Probably 5,000 or more individual items. And what has got to be one of the most foolish, nonsensical, and stupid actions, we're going to fund the government one item at a time. Yeah, hello, America. This is the Republican solution to the shutdown. We're going to fund the American government one item at a time. Let's see, this is day 4 of the shutdown. Okay, and to date we have funded 4 specific parts of the American government. Oh, excuse me, I'm wrong. The House of Representatives has voted to fund 4 of the thousands of different parts of the American government. 4 of them. Let me see, at this rate it'll probably be 2020 before the American government is up and operating. How stupid is that? When we have a solution available to us, Mr. Speaker, listen, we have a solution available to us. It's called a continuing resolution. It's passed the Senate. It doesn't have all of the things you may want, like terminating the Affordable Health Care Act, which is in effect, modifying it, defunding it, and God knows what else you may want. It's just what is known as a clean, continuing resolution that funds all of government. Not one item at a time, but all of government. And at what level? At the same level that it has been funded for the last 12 months. Not more funding, not less funding, but a whole lot less funding than I think is necessary. But nonetheless, it continues the funding of government at the same level as the last 12 months for the next month and a half. And then we go through all this again with another manufactured crisis. I wonder what the hunters are thinking of us. Mr. Speaker, these men and women want to go hunting. These men and women want to go fishing, camping. They want to go to the national parks. They want to recreate. They want America operating. Mr. Speaker, please. Please end this foolishness. Ronald Reagan went to Berlin, and he said, Mr. Gorbachev, take down this wall. Mr. Speaker, open up this government. Open up this government. You have the power. All you need to do is to bring to the floor the continuing resolution to fund the government at the very same level that it's been funded for the last 12 months, continue on for another 6 weeks so that we can establish
Senate will come to order, and the chaplain, retired Admiral Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer. Chaplain.
Let us pray. God of heaven, you are great, and we come before your throne with reverence. Lord, look at us and hear our prayers for our Congress, our nation, and our world. Make our lawmakers so transparently just and fair that falsehood may be banished by the truth that sets us free. Supply the needs of those who are hurting because of this government shutdown, as you give our senators the conviction that with you all things are possible. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for debate only until 4 p.m. this afternoon. During that period of time, senators will be allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each. Mr. President, Senator Schumer yesterday on the floor talked about what the House is doing, and he described it like Alice in Wonderland. I don't know if that's an apt description. Maybe it's beyond that. Mr. President, here is now where we are. The House has passed a bill to pay furloughed federal employees. Now listen to this, though, Mr. President. Once the government opens. Well, why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we do that? But the problem is, this uncontroversial legislation is kind of unique, isn't it? So now what the Republicans of the House are telling, because they're the ones that set the agenda, what they're telling all these federal workers, what we're going to do for you now, even though we don't like federal workers and we haven't given you a raise in 3 years, what we're going to do now is give you a paid vacation. And that's what it is. These people who want to go to work can't go to work, but they're going to get paid. They know when they leave here, and we knew that anyway. We heard today that a number of federal employees are applying for unemployment benefits. So it's really cruel to tell workers they'll receive back pay once the government opens and then refuse to open the government. Mr. President, let's open the government.